Good morning, Dolphins fans. Welcome to another episode here of On the FinSide with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL on Twitter. Paul is fanatic_pick. The NFL playoffs divisional round continues this weekend, but the Dolphins offseason is now, at least here on this show. And we're going to take a look here at a couple of things. First, we've got some offensive coordinator candidates for the Dolphins. More should be on the way as teams leave the playoffs. And also taking a high-level look at the Dolphins' number 3 pick, because we've got some catching up to do here, because really throughout the year, Paul, I mean, I don't know about you, but there was a time when the Texans were, I think, 4-7, 4-8, that there was no way in hell I thought the Dolphins would have the 3rd pick. And I was thinking, if you had offered me the 8th pick, in week 12 of the NFL season, I would have probably taken it.
I probably would have too. But at the same time, Houston looked like a team that was lost, and they looked like that most of the year, other than a handful of players. I mean, it was pretty telling watching Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt walk off the field apologizing to each other after that last game for the season that they had and the season wasted. But, yeah.
Season wasted, and it's gotten worse. And look, we're not going to go into Deshaun Watson any more than we have. We've had our show. We are operating here under the assumption that Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the Miami Dolphins starting quarterback. We're excited to see the Dolphins building around him. So our last show was certainly not about a blemish of anything with Tua. Let's get that very clear. Part of that puzzle, too, is going to be who is going to be the Miami Dolphins offensive coordinator this year. Some candidates' names have been released this week. There was a list of 6 guys. I don't think I'm missing anybody here at the beginning of the week. And that was 49ers run game coordinator Mike McDaniel, who has now been promoted to offensive coordinator for the 49ers. So he's out of the picture. Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator for Clemson, which would have been an interesting one with Travis Etienne coming out. He is also not in the picture anymore either. That leaves 4 guys, and 2 of them are in-house. You've got George Godsey, who has gotten very close with Tua here over the last couple of weeks. You've also got Eric Studesville, who is the running back coach for the Dolphins, has a lot of experience in this league too. Then you have 2 outside candidates. One is Matt Canada, the quarterback coach for the Steelers. He also has a lot of experience with LSU, NC State, developing quarterbacks. And finally, Pep Hamilton, who is the offensive coordinator here in several places, but most notably with Andrew Luck at Stanford and with the Indianapolis Colts. So, Paul, kind of looking at this list, I'll throw it to you. What did you make of this to begin with?
Well, I think it's an incomplete list at the moment. I think as teams get eliminated from the playoffs, there's a couple other guys that Miami's going to try to take a look at. One name that just jumps right into the front of my brain is Kafka. But the one that excites me, and you and I talked a little bit about this off the air right now, is a guy that it took me a little bit to warm to, and I had to look at a little more. If it's not going to be an internal candidate, I kind of dig Matt Canada, because I think there are some options there with the way he calls an offense. If you go out and you look, Canada's one of those guys that'll call 2 or 3 shifts before the snap that put guys in a better position. And with a guy like Tua that has the ability to read a defense before the snap, if he can implement a system with that takes advantage of Miami's positionless players that they have on offense, because they do have positionless players. And when I say that, it's kind of like with the defense where, Van Noy's technically a linebacker, but you ask him, he's a football player. He's going to put his hand in the dirt sometimes. He's going to be moving all over the formation. You got guys like Bobby McCain that move forward. And on offense, you got guys like Lynn Bowden, who can line up anywhere from quarterback to running back to occasionally like a small tight end to wide receiver. You've got guys like Malcolm Perry that can line up all over the formation. And if you've got guys like that, you can really have fun with a smart quarterback and guys that can move around. You can go into position to succeed. So you could have literally with those formational shifts 3 or 4 different play calls right off the rip. That's not necessarily an audible, but you can choose based on those shifts which play at the line of scrimmage. So there's some fun stuff they can do. The only thing with Canada is, and Kat, I'm glad you brought this up when we were talking before, he's called a very conservative offense at times, and if he's going to come in here and call a conservative offense, I'm not interested. If he's going to come in here and utilize those building blocks and take that next step as a coordinator, I am 100% on board.
Yeah, and I think everything you said there is well said on Matt Canada. Looking at his history and his formations, I agree with you. It's a lot of pre-snap moving around, which I like. From what I've heard from LSU fans, that after the ball is snapped, it tends to be very conservative. That's what I won't like. But that doesn't necessarily mean Matt Canada is going to call the same plays here that he called at LSU. They had a mutual parting of ways. I don't know if it was a firing. I don't know if it was actually mutual, but they paid him almost $2 million to get out of there as a college football coordinator. So I don't know. I think he's probably my top choice right now too, out of this list of 4, because two guys that I don't want. Number one, I do not want Pep Hamilton. Period.
No.
Absolutely 100% no. And I'm fearful that he's going to get the job. The reason for it is when I watched Andrew Luck at really Pep Hamilton, I believe it was his Luck's second year with the Colts in 2013, I saw a lot of bunch formations, very little motion, and unbelievably painfully conservative in that, it's 3rd and 7 and you're throwing a 2-yard pass. I don't think Andrew Luck was dumb enough to be calling those types of plays. So
real quick on Pep, Cat, I just want to jump in.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reports that he is in talks with Seattle to go up there and coach with Pete Carroll. So
awesome.
Hopefully, go up there and be conservative with Russ Wilson.
Yep, you bet. And sometimes in those situations too, if Russell Wilson's the offensive coordinator as far as I'm concerned. So, hey, Pep, give me some good ideas along the way. That's it. I think Tua needs a little bit more at this stage in his career. So out on Pep Hamilton for me. And then Eric Stoodsville, I think just out of respect, they put him in this. That's I don't know any inside info on that. That's just my guess because he's been in the league for a long time. He's never been an offensive coordinator. He's never called plays. He's been a running backs coach and he's been an interim head coach. But that's it. And funny enough, he has been a defensive coordinator in his career. He was defensive coordinator for 1 year at Wingate and 2 years at Kent State back in the 90s, but never an offensive coordinator. So I hope Stoodsville does stay on staff here, but I don't see him actually being in the running.
See, and that's one area that you and I differ. Brian Flores has shown he doesn't give a damn where a guy comes from. I believe last year he pulled a high school coach up to be one of his top coaches. He doesn't give a damn if they've been a coordinator before. It's whether or not he thinks they can do the job. End of story. So if Flores thinks Stoodsville can be the guy, he doesn't give a damn about the fact he hasn't been a coordinator before. He doesn't give a damn about the fact that he's been around the league and bounced around a little bit. All he cares about is he the guy that I want running my offense?
I'd be interested to know what the pathway would be for getting there. If he's never been a quarterbacks coach, he's never called plays. I don't know how he would think he's qualified. I mean, does he just get up in the chalkboard and draw 10 plays up? I don't know. Maybe that would work. Who knows? Now George Gotsey too is the really based on what you saw on the sideline last year to his right-hand man, not Chan Gailey, not anybody else on the Dolphins coaching staff. Not to say they didn't have a hand in any of it, but Godsey looked like the guy he was constantly bouncing ideas off of. So to me, if Tua really vouches for him, then I think he is the head candidate out of these four to get the job. But also too, and I'm not really going to speculate on teams that are in the playoffs, not because I can't, but because you could go 20, 30 deep on your list, and we're not going to do that on this show of guys who could possibly be offensive coordinator candidates. So if I were to guess right now, if I were to make a guess, I would say George Godsey, based on this list, would be offensive coordinator. Matt Canada, though, would probably barely be the choice that I want.
Yeah, if it's Godsey, Canada, and I'm still going to throw his name out there, or Kafka, I'm okay. I can't, in good conscience, and a lot of our listeners are regulars. They've been watching us for a while. They've watched us this season. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend anybody that came from the Chargers coaching staff right now. It's the amount that I have torn them to shreds since studying them before the Dolphins game against the Chargers. And the fact that when I hear that, I don't care that Herbert was a rookie. When I hear that still within reach of being able to come back and potentially try to win a game with your supposed stud rookie of the year quarterback, you're afraid to throw the ball because you don't understand what the defense is doing. And don't get me wrong, Flores does a good job with his defenses. And I want nothing to do with an offensive coordinator at the NFL level that went, we were afraid to run the ball, so we just handed it off to Kalen Balazs and started running out the clock in the third quarter. You know, I want nothing to do with that.
Well, I could be mistaken here, but I don't think he was. I don't think Pep was the offensive coordinator for the
Chargers. But I want nothing to do with that staff. Period. Like,
okay.
Your quarterback's coach should be able to stand up to the offensive coordinator and say, "Dude, let him throw."
Well, yeah, and I think if Pep were offensive coordinator of the Chargers, that's what the playbook would still look like.
I don't know.
The conservative, because I'll say too that I never expected Justin Herbert to play to this level. If I had said on the show last year he was going to set the rookie record for most touchdowns in a season, I think either one of us would have said you're crazy. So I will say right now I was wrong on Justin Herbert, but quarterbacks can change from one year to the next, and you tend to get figured out a little bit more in your second year, and that's where I get the feeling Tua is going to get a little bit better, and Herbert may never, but Herbert's still at a high level now. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at on that. So we'll keep updating everybody here on the offensive coordinator candidates as the weeks go by. Paul, the second part here that we're going to talk about is that number 3 pick in the draft. And, you know, everybody right now is going crazy for Devontae Smith, the wide receiver out of Alabama, won the Heisman Trophy and did have an incredible season, 117 catches, over 1,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, very well deserved for the Heisman Trophy on there. And I said at the time, or I said after the Notre Dame game, you all have lost your minds. You take this guy number 3, you're crazy. I'm not even taking him in a trade down at 10. I'll admit I've walked back that second part where, yes, I would take him in the top 10. I would take him comfortably. I'd be excited. But I'd still be a little underwhelmed with him with the 3rd overall pick. So anyway, those are just some thoughts off the top of my head with what's being talked about among Dolphins Twitter. What are some just free-flowing thoughts that you have with the 3rd pick for the Dolphins right now?
Well, it sounds like there's a very high likelihood that Penei Sewell will be off the board. And that can all change between now and April. It sounds like Robert Saleh is looking to stick with Sam
Darnold.
Yeah, Sam Darnold, Captain Ghostman. And if he does that, he's going to probably try to put the best pair of bookend tackles in the league around him. There's a lot of different options, but really, the more I look at it, and I know some of our listeners have been
actually, Paul. Let's park there for just a second.
Okay.
We'll go back to your point, but if we miss it, I think we'll miss our opportunity here. Is with that number 2 pick. Yeah, that's what's being talked about right now. And ESPN across the board feels very strong that the Jets will not take a quarterback at number 2.
Well, they obviously listen to our show.
Obviously. Well, they listen to you, not me. I think they will take a quarterback. But so Eddie with ESPN, I listened to the Kuiper and McShay's podcast. They talked as if the Jets taking a quarterback at 2 is not even an option for them. And sometimes McShay and Kuiper know a couple of things, sometimes they don't. Adam Schefter, as you had mentioned, is also based on his previous report, is very convinced that they're not going to take a quarterback at 2 as well. My question becomes, why are the Jets constantly leaking out this information with the number 2 pick, and that they're not going to go quarterback? On one hand, I say, what do they have to gain? Because they've got a quarterback there at 2. So why are they doing a smokescreen? Or maybe the people at ESPN actually know something.
Well, I think they're constantly leaking this out because they're a horrible dumpster fire of an organization from top to bottom. They finally did, I will say, they finally did get themselves a damn good coach. And really, part of the equation here, too, is Sam Darnold is a very good fit in a Robert Saleh offense. So it's, we'll see. We will see how it shakes out. We've seen what happens when Adam Gase calls an offense and how much it masks talent on the team. It's so yeah. I really, I've been on this kick for a while now. I really think the Jets don't go quarterback because they're not at the number 1 where Trevor Lawrence was.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. Robert Saleh, yeah, I think that's a great hire. He looks like a leader of men. And defensively, he's a defensive coach. So it wouldn't be his offense, but it would be Michael Floor's offense.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been the 49ers passing game coordinator. So
Yeah.
they're going to work hand in hand. So I do think those are 2 really good hires from them. But staying there on that number 2 pick is, as of today, my guess is it's going to be that if they don't try to trade down, they take Zach Wilson, the quarterback out of BYU. That's my guess on that. Because I just don't see a third head coach in 4 years saying that I can fix Sam Darnold. I don't see that. But that's my guess at this point, because they did give up. They drafted him 3rd overall, and they gave up 3 second-round picks to move up from 6 to 3 for that spot just several years ago. So that certainly is a possibility. But and that leads into with the 3rd pick here, how important it is for Justin Fields and Zach Wilson for their stock to be as high as possible. I look at Justin Fields and I say, 3 of his last 5 games in college at Ohio State were really, really bad. So I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts here with the 3rd pick.
There really are, and I am going to say the same thing I've been saying for a while. There are a handful of guys I would take at the 3rd overall pick, and because there's a handful of guys I would take at the 3rd overall pick, I have zero qualms whatsoever about trying to trade down to 6 with the Eagles, who Adam Gase, if he ends up being the Eagles head coach, which is the funniest damn thing on the planet, is probably going to want to go get one of those quarterbacks. Dan Campbell, if he ends up being the head coach of the Lions, as is potentially rumored, is probably going to want to get his quarterback to groom behind Matt Stafford, who is a free agent, I think, in 2 years at this point. And, there's a team sitting there at 3 that would love to add draft capital from a terrible team and be able to still get one of those top talents on the board at, 5, 6, 7 overall.
So let's stick there for a second. You're talking about trading down somewhere between, if I'm understanding correctly, between 6 and 8. So you've got the Eagles at 6, you've got the Panthers there at 7, Lions at 7 and Panthers at 8. What is the minimum that you would take to move down, let's say from 3 to 6?
Minimum? I'd want a first next year. And I'd like to add a second either this year or next year. Preferably this year, but again.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you what, if
I'm asking for more, don't get me wrong.
Right now, where I stand is with the 3rd pick, I want one of two, my two ideal scenarios. They stay at 3 and take Penny Sewell, in my other ideal scenario is that you trade down into that 6 to 8 range and you get at least a first round pick in 2022. Because the reason for that is if somebody comes up, they're likely coming up to take a quarterback,
Yeah.
meaning that you're going to get a first round pick from a team that is starting a rookie quarterback. And what happened with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert last year, their production is not the norm. And even they weren't on winning football teams. So that really allows this draft party to continue into 2022 with the draft picks that they have. So yeah, that's getting a first overall pick, or excuse me, a first round pick in 2022, I think would be big.
Oh, completely. And you know, it. Miami might be in position to create a bidding war for that pick. And you're going to hate this, but if the Jets were to take a quarterback, or if they were to trade out and somebody traded up to take Justin Fields, I think it opens Miami's options even more with that third round pick being able to trade back and start a bidding war, because now you've got Penei Sewell and either Zach Wilson or Justin Fields as the two there, and a bare cupboard behind them at a need position for several teams that are going to want to basically do what they have to do to get their guy. And you're still going to be in position. So you trade down to 6, 7, 8. You're still in position where I expect Penei Sewell, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and Trevor Lawrence to be gone in the top 5 picks. No matter what the scenario, those 4 I expect to be gone, short of a gas mask issue right before the draft. Right? That being the case, you've still got Micah Parsons, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, and Kyle Pitts sitting there. That's 5 additional players. If you're in that 6 to 8 range, you are coming away with one of those 5 players, unless there's somebody else you're absolutely in love with. But either way, you're gonna come away with a difference maker for this football team. And I can't believe, I can't say I wouldn't take a wide receiver in the top 10, because I literally have it in my head that if Micah Parsons is gone, I would have zero problems taking a Kyle Pitts and hammering away at receiver later on, because there are receivers in this draft that make a difference beyond the number 20 pick of the first round. Kadarius Toney, Jalen Darden, Shee Smith, who's probably going to be there in the 4th round. You can run down this list, guys that get separation and guys that get open and guys that do a lot of special things beyond the top 10 list. You can't find a tight end that's going to be what Kyle Pitts could be. He's like a Mike Gesicki that can block.
Yeah, I wonder if there's room for Gesicki and Pitts on this type of
There
offense.
is.
I also think too, I might be overthinking that as well, because of the incredible things that Pitts can do. Pitts had in 8 games this year, he had 12 touchdowns, 770 yards, and Florida's not playing, Western Kentucky every week. They're playing great opponents every week. So he's one we'll talk about a lot. And yeah, that's where I'm at with the 3rd pick. And when it comes to Devontae Smith is, look, Devontae Smith would probably it would be unfavorable for me just at the end of all this to stay at 3 and to take Devontae Smith. Okay. That would be, I wouldn't be irate. I think we'd have a very good, potentially great player coming off a great season, but trading down, would you rather have Devontae Smith at 3, or would you rather have Jalen Waddle or Kyle Pitts, a 3rd rounder and a first next year? To me, that's an easy choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same argument I made when we talked about Deshaun Watson before, and I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I'll take 2 and a bunch of weapons over any individual quarterback. It's Miami's got the capital to build a solid young team that is dominant for years right now. They do. Right. And they can add to that capital, which is insane. Realistically, the floor for a trade down at this point is at least 1 additional first and probably a 2nd. I'm leaning close on the probably, but that's the floor. And if you've got a bidding war going on and that's the entry price, it could get really fun.
Yeah, I can't remember whose mock draft it was. It might have been Dane Brugler, it might have been PFF, might have been the Draft Network. I'm not sure. I follow all those. They get blurred for me. But one mock I saw that I thought was pretty realistic draft compensation is the Dolphins moving from 3 down to 8 and getting a third rounder this year and a 2022 first rounder
Yep, I'd
in
be
that
down.
scenario. I would say that would be the minimum requirement there. Yeah, I think any 2022 first rounder that you get in a trade down, I'd be open to. But if it's less than that, I'm not moving off Penny Sewell at number 3. That's me personally. If Penny Sewell is there, I'm not going to just stay there and take Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. I'm not doing it. Even though they're two guys that are high on my board. But Paul, we talked about too the draft compensation. I did a little research this week here too.
Okay.
And in addition, I think one thing to keep in mind here too is just like you said, if Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, if they are the apple of somebody's eye to trade up to 3, that draft compensation in that trade up for the other team dramatically increases because it's extremely rare for a team to move up into the top 5 for a non-quarterback. Now, Penny Sewell could be a special player. So maybe the Bengals or Eagles think a little differently on that. But I would say it's more unlikely that a team gives up like next year's first and another pick and this year's first round pick to move up for Penny Sewell or Devontae Smith. Just my opinion on that. But taking a look here historically, over the last 20 years, there have been 5 trade ups into the top 5 for a non-quarterback. In 2014, you had the Bills moving up from 9 to 4 to take Sammy Watkins. They gave up a first rounder the following year and another, I think, mid-round pick. The Dolphins traded from 12 up to 3 in 2013 for Deion Jordan. Now, they only gave up a second rounder in that move up. That's kind of an outlier because it was a draft that was historically bad, not only now, but at the time. So we're going to throw that one out there. The 2012 draft, the Browns moved from 4 to 3 to take Trent Richardson. They gave up from the move from 4 to 3. They gave up a 4th, a 5th, and a 7th for the swap, just for one spot. So that's more picks that could be available if the Dolphins made such a trade. And then the Jaguars moved from 7 to 5 and gave up a 4th rounder for Justin Blackmon. 2003, finally, the Jets moved from 12 to 3. They gave up a first rounder as well as a 4th rounder to move there from 13 to 4. So that kind of gives you an idea a little bit of the draft compensation to move up to the 3rd or 4th overall pick. But overall, the teams that moved up got Sammy Watkins, Deion Jordan, Trent Richardson, Justin Blackmon, and Dwayne Robertson. 4 of those 5 guys, major busts. So there is strength and quantity by moving down sometimes.
There is, and Kat, there's a great question in chat that I'm going to actually pitch to you first in a minute. But just for our listeners out there, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you're clicking like, make sure you're subscribing. And Kat, I'm going to give a quick shout out because these 2 kids actually sent me a message this week. It was awesome. They make their dad listen to the show with them every week. He tries to kick them out of the room, and they're like, no, we're listening to Paul and Kat.
Awesome.
Yeah, so Sierra and Brandon, thank you guys very much for listening to us every week and literally chasing your dad around asking if we've got more episodes out yet. So awesome stuff.
Oh, that's great to hear. I don't know if I'm a role model, but I do keep my language clean now. So
yeah,
have that going for us.
So the question we got, so Kat, assuming the Jets take Sewell at number 2 and Miami cannot find a trade partner from number 3, gun to head, who are you taking at number 3? Trevor Lawrence and Sewell off the board.
That's a great question. And that to me is for me is a worst case scenario. And it's not even that bad of a scenario. I'm going, see, I'd be close between 3 players: Micah Parsons, Jamar Chase, and then Devontae Smith in a distant third, I'd say. So I'm going to go with, I'd go with Micah Parsons. I don't think the team would feel the same way because there's so much you have to learn early on to be an off-ball linebacker in this defense. But I think Micah Parsons, Penny Sewell, and Trevor Lawrence would be fitting for them to be the top 3 picks. I don't use the word generational, but I use generational with those 3 guys.
Yeah, it's for me the depth and breadth at the wide receiver position. I've got the same 3 guys on my brain here at 3, and everybody that watches our show knows about this thing here. It's Micah Parsons for me. I know there would be a learning curve, but he is a very smart player, and all of his skills, the fact that he can play at 3 levels are a huge boost, and the fact that he can play at 3 levels effectively are a huge boost, especially in this positionless defense, which is a little easier to learn than it looks like it would be. But at the end of the day, there are 2 things with him. Well, there's 2 guys that have something really special to me on the defensive side of the ball that I don't see from anybody else in this draft. One of them is Micah Parsons. And all the physical skills aside, if it wasn't for this, he would still probably be my pick. But this is something that Flores is going to love. If you watch Micah Parsons' hands when he makes a tackle, the guy forces a lot of fumbles because he literally has the ability to wrap a guy up, and somehow his hand always finds the ball while having the guy firmly wrapped and is trying to strip it. Watch his highlights, and you see that hand sneaking in and just pulling every play, whether it's sacking the quarterback, tackling a running back in the open field, and he's not losing the tackle based off of it, which is awesome. If he was ending up with a lot of broken tackles and missed tackles because he was trying to strip the ball, I'm out. But he manages to get those long arms around somebody, and literally just and it's special. The other guy, you and I have talked about this, at least on Twitter, back and forth, is a guy that if Miami were to trade down at the 18th pick into the low 20s, I wouldn't be opposed to Carlos Basham. He's a guy we talked about last year for the draft when we expected him to come out. And he's a guy that plays the read option, which is the future of football, and we're seeing more and more teams move towards that read option. He sets an edge, he can rush the passer, but he plays the read option better than anybody I've ever seen. Normally, the read option is predicated on the quarterback making a read off of what a defensive end or a linebacker, what one particular player is doing. If they crash, he keeps. If they stay home, he hands it off. Carlos Basham has the ability to come in, read that read option, break down, make that split instant decision when he's still in position to play either item. And it's something I haven't seen from anybody else. They have to commit one way or the other. He's smart enough, fast enough, and able to break that down. Do I think Kwity Paye is a more talented defensive end? Yes, we both do. Basham's a better fit, and he plays that read option, which is huge for the NFL today.
Yeah, look on my Twitter page, Brian Cat NFL. I've got some videos up on Kwity Paye, who I think is a phenomenal athlete. And you may see in mock drafts in the top 10. I don't see the Dolphins targeting him because he's going to make his money outside the offensive tackle shoulder pad. He's going to run around the offensive tackle. I'm not saying he can't do anything else. He can blitz, he can get to the quarterback, all that stuff. But yeah, Basham at 6'5", 280 likely is going to be very high on the Dolphins' radar, given that they value intelligence, size, and gap integrity in what they're doing. So Basham wouldn't surprise me. He should have come into the draft last year because I think he would have been a first-round pick. Now, teams may view him as just a solid across-the-board type of prospect. That's kind of what Raekwon Davis. His stock is kind of similar to Raekwon Davis's last year, except I think Basham will end up getting drafted higher than 55. So, Paul, let's go back to before we wrap up here. Let's go back to what you said. There.
This thing, I talk a lot.
I mean, hey, look, it's what else are we going to talk about in the offseason here, except draft picks and situations and stuff like that. So, at number 3 in that scenario, you got Lawrence going 1, you got Sewell going 2, and number 3, if you can't find a trade down partner, that means the quarterbacks are dropping. If Wilson or Fields is not appetizing at 3, they may fall to out of the top 10. when you look at probably not out of top 10, but you get my drift. Um, so in that scenario, do you stay at 3 or you take Micah Parsons, or do you take a trade down from 6 to 8 and probably lose out on Micah Parsons?
It really depends on how the board shapes up at that point. It's a little easier to say how the board shapes at 3 than it does at 6. I mean, you know me. You know, I've been doing mock drafts for months, just
God, yeah.
playing. I send them to you just to make you feel good, and warm, and fuzzy.
I hate mock drafts.
I love it. We need a I hate mock drafts T-shirt with your name next to it.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
But in reality, I've done a number of those where the situation where I'm sitting there at 6 and I've got Smith, Parsons, Pitts, and I think it was Waddle available a handful of times. Because Jamar Chase went in the top 5 with the other 4. And if I'm at 6 and those 4 are all available, I have no qualms whatsoever about trading down to 8 and adding even more ammunition and knowing I'm still going to have my choice of at least 2 of those 4.
Yeah, I mean, there could be opportunities to trade down multiple times here, if that presents itself. The big thing is the reason that I say this every year, the reason we want to trade down in that scenario is the same reason why it's going to be difficult for a trade up partner to find one of those. You just look at last year when the 2 teams picking ahead of the Dolphins, the Lions at 3, they took Jeff Okudah. They desperately wanted to trade down. Giants at 4 took Andrew Thomas. I don't know if they desperately wanted to trade down, but was perceived as a reach at that time, and it would have been beneficial for them to trade down. But nobody's going to trade up in that scenario because Dolphins could find themselves, if you see the quarterbacks falling, could find themselves in a similar scenario. I don't think anybody is going to give a first-round pick to move up for Micah Parsons in a swap. I don't see that happening. Maybe I'm wrong, but history dictates that's very unlikely. Paul, before we get out of here, any other questions, themes come from the chat there?
I've got to say, our listeners are coming around. You're coming around, and I love it. Everybody needs their Micah Parsons, no matter what. No, I'm telling you.
I'm not coming around yet.
You're coming around. You were willing to take him at 3 today.
Yeah. I would say it would be an unappetizing scenario if Sewell's off the board, the quarterbacks are dropping, and nobody's trading up. In those 3 scenarios, I love Micah Parsons as a prospect. For an off-ball linebacker, though, I will warn you this: to justify a top 3 pick, man, he's got to be out of this world. I mean, you look at historically some of the guys. I mean, Devin White was a 5th overall pick a few years ago. He's been a good player. 5th overall worthy? I don't know. But he did have 7 sacks this year. So anyway, but if you want to see Micah Parsons and how incredible and how he could take over a game, watch the Cotton Bowl from last year. Granted, it was against Memphis, but 14 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. I think 2 fumble recovery. It was just an incredible game. So he would bring a lot, especially playing with Brian Flores and Josh Boyer.
So the other one that we have is, and Kat, I think I can speak for you. Just tell me whether or not I'm correct. Who the consensus is for the offensive coordinator job of the candidates we've got sitting out there? I think Kat and I are both in the camp of Matt Canada with some internal candidates as the runner-up.
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer at this time. I would say the most likely, just my opinion, is George Godsey of those 4. The one I would take, and not overwhelmingly, would be Matt Canada. But I also expect more offensive coordinators to enter the picture. I think it'd be foolish of the Dolphins to hire somebody this quickly before they get a view of the entire field. We still have 8 teams left in the playoffs here.
Yeah. Other than that, I think we're good. I think we're in good shape right now.
Okay. Well, hey, we're going to have a lot more content here, especially with the draft. Keep an eye out either this week or next Saturday, probably sometime this week. Paul and I are going to unleash our top 10 board for the Miami Dolphins in the entire draft. So we're not talking about scheme fit. We're not talking about sleepers. We'll get to that a little bit later. But you're going to have on Monday is the deadline for underclassmen to declare. So we're going to have a better understanding of who's actually in the draft. And then we're going to have our top 10 board here either this week or the following week. So that's going to do it for our breakdown here of the Dolphins offensive coordinators, as well as a high level look at the number 3 pick. Follow me at Brian Cat NFL, Paul at Fanatic_pick on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side.